Chapter 1, Part 2, and His Skinny White Woman. The guru usually isn't doing it alone. Time and again, when an American cult has come to public attention, often because it's crossed some very clear lines and has victims or bodies to show for it, we find, very near the cult leader, a skinny white woman pulling some of the strings. When NXIVM was all over the national news in 2017 to 2018, and it came to light that Allison Mack was one of Keith Raniere's lieutenants, who helped with his schemes to groom and sexually abuse women, I was heartbroken. Not sweet Chloe from Smallville, but also intrigued. Why her? Why, in culty groups, did there seem to be so many women like her? Thin, white, overly dedicated to the leader, with more access to him and more privileges than most of the other members. Outliers exist, as they always do, but the few exceptions only underscore how dominant the pattern is. My own childhood had been very much marked by our leader's death when his skinny white woman took over as the anointed leader of the cult. When the news could speak of nothing other than Jeffrey Epstein and his teenage sex trafficking ring, there she was again, the skinny white woman in the body of Ghislaine Maxwell. I saw her everywhere, in the matriarchs of the Duggar family, in the woman at the center of One Taste, Hollywood's infamous orgasm cult. And I started to notice the pattern in so many American culty groups, going all the way back to the beginning of the country. What was it about the skinny white woman that made her necessary to the success of the cult leader and their establishment of coercive control? I knew instinctively that both her whiteness and her skinniness were important. I could think of countless aunties who fit this description in the communes of my childhood, always close to the highest leaders, plugged deeply into the organizational structure, bullying other women and girls about their behavior, including their weight. These women at the top were always white, even though we lived in countries where most people were not white. Their significance didn't hit me until a fellow survivor of the Children of God, who is a woman of color, commented on one of my Facebook posts. What, do cult leaders not like voluptuous women or something? In that joke, the truth revealed itself. Of course, it had nothing to do with the women being voluptuous or not. It was the whiteness that mattered. That was exactly the point. I took to TikTok, eager to explain my eureka moment and to see if anyone thought it had merit. I explained that the cult leader, whether a man or a woman, often has a skinny white woman dedicated to them and playing a very important role in the cult. One of her many jobs is to whitewash the sins of the leader, both to members and outer society. Her power comes from the white supremacist and patriarchal and Christian concept of the pure, chaste white woman. Her very presence acts as a civilizing agent in a way we've seen women play throughout history. In regular organizations as well, women, often white, often skinny, are let into the leadership in order to whitewash what could be perceived as the sins of the organization. With this realization, I also saw that I had played that role in the U.S. Army, thinking I was fighting hard for the equality of women in the military, but in reality maybe being more of a shield against critical complaint. How can the U.S. Army possibly be a toxic place for women if Captain Daniela Mestenek has been so successful there, doing the things they usually only let the boys do? In my memoir, I tried to tell a more nuanced story, that I was broken by playing a game never designed for me to win, all the while trying not to bleed to death from the shards of the glass ceiling I was helping shatter. I stopped playing the role of the skinny white woman, stopped being the perfect, proud woman veteran who would never say a critical word. I was not afraid of calling out the army colonels and generals, and the cult uncles, for their bad behavior. By letting it all come out, I had let it, and myself, get ugly, which goes against everything the skinny white woman is supposed to do. On social media, my musings about the skinny white woman concept went viral, with hundreds, then hundreds of thousands, of people liking, saving, and commenting on my posts. It turns out that I'm not the only one who's noticed her, both in cults and in countless forms of our regular organizations. In Cultish, Amanda Montell noted the pattern of power abuse with an older man at the top and by his side a clique of fair-skinned 20 and 30-something women who acquiesce to exchanging their whiteness and sexuality for a few more grains of power. Artist and anti-racism educator Amanda K. Gross names this dynamic mistress syndrome in her book, White Women Get Ready, How Healing Post-Traumatic Mistress Syndrome Leads to Anti-Racist Change. And she doesn't pull any punches. In her words, the mistress is not simply an accessory to white supremacy. She is its loyal lieutenant, actively maintaining the master's house for her own comfort. Gross explains that white women have historically secured their survival and limited power by not dismantling oppressive systems, but by upholding them, smoothing their brutal edges with a smile and protecting the very men who built them. She describes the mistress as someone who weaponizes her whiteness and performative vulnerability. She shields patriarchal and racist power structures from scrutiny. She also brutalizes people who threaten the status quo. It's a pattern that stretches from the blood-soaked cotton fields of the American South to the sterile cubicles of today's corporate cults. Mistress syndrome captures exactly the role the skinny white woman plays. She's not a victim, not an innocent bystander. She is the system's secret weapon, bought off with scraps of proximity to power, in exchange for her loyalty and silence. And make no mistake, loyalty is a choice. Choosing to protect the master's house while others burn outside is still choosing the master's house. As more than one black woman has confided to me, Gross writes, if white women would get their act together, oppression wouldn't stand a chance. Even when a woman seems to be in power, such as the CEO of a major corporation, or even your hashtag girlboss neighbor who's making bank with her work from home scheme, she's still propping up a system ruled by men. The authors of Feminism for the 99% tell us that this kind of executive feminism enables the forces supporting global capital to portray themselves as progressive while maintaining the status quo. The skinny white woman softens the cruel image of capitalism with her perceived sensitivity and nurturing nature. In The Trouble with White Women, Kyla Schuler writes, when shed by the CEO, white women's tears become a commodity, an asset, and a safeguard, proof that capitalism can have a heart. The emotional feminist CEO secures her own likability and cleanses, or whitewashes, the means of production at the same time, sanctifying runaway profits with the humanity streaming down her face. Although through social media conversations and my own research into intersectional feminism, the image of the skinny white woman began to take form. She's the Allison Mack to Nexium's Keith Raniere, the Ghislaine Maxwell to Jeffrey Epstein, the Melania to Donald Trump, the Rebecca Paltrow to Adam Newman, and any number of evangelical pastors' wives. She is thin because in our culture, being skinny is ideal and a visual representation of self-sacrifice. More in Chapter 4 on how cult leaders weaponize this desire to be thin. She is at once both a role model and proof that the ideal is achievable. For those outside the cult, she serves as an attraction, or a distraction. In short, she is exactly who you want by your side if you are sex trafficking children, as Ghislaine Maxwell and my own cult leader, Karen, Mama Maria, Zerby, demonstrated so well. If you asked the skinny white woman, she would tell you that she has real power, and she truly believes she does. Sarah Edmondson, one of the women who initially reported Nexium as a cult to the New York Times, says, "We didn't know that Keith had created a dangerous psychological hierarchy among us, that he didn't think of us as the principal leaders of his company, that instead he thought of us as the most devout followers in his cult." While the scope and details in the world of business and politics are different in cults like NXIVM, the pattern is the same. The civilizing effect the white woman confers by her very existence is ultimately used against her and others by those really at the top pulling the strings. As white women lean in and conquer the corner office, Kyla Schuler tells us that it is their duty to, in fact, redeem capitalism itself, turning cutthroat companies like Google into the kinds of places with pregnancy parking spots. Women in this category, Schuler continues, ought to master the feminine performance of making everyone else comfortable while subordinating their own needs to those of the company at large. Smiling your way through outlandish sexism plays the long game. By not rocking the boat can become yours. Elizabeth Holmes exemplifies a woman who seemed to make the boat her own by transcending gender and making it to the top of the man's world of Silicon Valley. As the charismatic leader of biotech startup Theranos, she created hypnotic, myth-like origin story of the gifted little girl who was afraid of needles, who lost a beloved uncle to cancer, who now wanted to improve the world by providing faster, better blood tests. In the height of her status as Wall Street golden child, she was feted as a biomedical version of Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, a wonderkind college dropout who would make blood testing as convenient as the iPhone. Holmes fully embraced the role of a charismatic leader, donning Jobs' signature black turtlenecks, promoting the Theranos device as a revolutionary breakthrough for humanity, and surrounding herself with directors who were more captivated by her persona than equipped to provide meaningful oversight. While not explicitly calling Theranos a cult in his book Bad Blood, Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup, journalist John Carreyrou describes a scene where, still visibly angry, Elizabeth told the gathered employees that she was building a religion. If there were any among them who didn't believe, they should leave. Sunny Balwani put it more bluntly. Anyone not prepared to show complete devotion and unmitigated loyalty to the company should get the fuck out. But if we look a little closer, we see that Holmes had a double role. Not only was she the charismatic leader of Theranos, she was also, in many ways, acting as her own skinny white woman. Investors would admit in hindsight that they overlooked potential red flags because of her looks and connections to famous and white ancestors. She aligned herself with very powerful older men who seemed to succumb to a certain charm. And those powerful men could influence people in the government. Phyllis Gardner, Holmes's former Stanford professor, said in The Inventor, an HBO documentary. Essentially, many people trusted and were duped by her because she was a woman. Holmes's own image and cultivation of the ideal of thin white woman was sharp enough to beat the boys at their own game and functioned as the skinny white woman often does, drawing everyone's attention away from the many red flags. From my own experience in the U.S. Army, fighting hard to play the boys' game, and becoming one of the first Army women to be on an integrated deliberate ground combat team, I learned that the women saddled with the role of breaking glass ceilings, or being the female Steve Jobs, can't recognize how she's being used, in fact, to reinforce the patriarchal and hierarchical systems. A Rolling Stone article by E.J. Dixon titled How Lean-In Feminism Created Elizabeth Holmes and the Toxic Lady Boss articulates quite well how Holmes's rise and fall encapsulates a core problem of white feminism. What Holmes failed to realize is that cloaking yourself in feminism only works if you actively advocate for women other than yourself. On perhaps a smaller scale of the hashtag lady boss trend, we've seen the skinny white woman transcend the role of sidekick to ostensibly rule the world of new age alternative wellness. People like Goop matriarch Gwyneth Paltrow and essential oil selling moms may seem harmless, but there's an increasingly sinister side to this world in the form of the tradwife trend, the pastel arm of far-right ideological movements, remember QAnon? Anti-vaxxers and influencers like self-described spiritual catalyst Teal Swan, who has millions of online followers and has stirred controversy with YouTube videos on suicide, including ones that encourage followers to vividly visualize their own deaths. Some of Swan's most devoted followers travel to her retreat center in Costa Rica, paying thousands of dollars for spiritual healing programs, with reports that a number of them stay indefinitely, working for free to support her operations. Primarily online, conspiracy-minded wellness influencers find ways to monetize the suffering of trauma, illness, and parenting children with special needs. Vaccines cause autism, you know. Exploiting the legitimate distrust people have of America's capitalistic and misogynist healthcare system, and promising the soulful, nurturing, and intuitive alternative. Women like holistic psychiatrist Kelly Brogan and Dr. Christiane Northrup, self-described women's health expert, best-selling author, and guest on Oprah, seized upon the vulnerabilities of their followers to promote anti-vaccine conspiracy theories, all while peddling their spiritual coaching and nutritional supplement businesses. The Center for Counting Digital Hate's 2021 report found that in a sample of content shared on Facebook and Twitter, just 12 anti-vaccine activists were responsible for up to 65% of anti-vaccine posts, including those about COVID-19 vaccines. Both Brogan and Northrup made it onto the Disinformation Dozen list. When I looked deeper into the concept of the skinny white woman, it stood out to me that there are 3 subtypes of the skinny white woman trope that we see played out in our culture. First up, you have the vacuous, pretty sidekick, whose job it is to make the leader's message palatable, sexy, and alluring. She is sweet and nice and non-confrontational, in the case of many pastors' wives, Michelle Duggar, Allison Mack, and all those NXIVM girls, and Ghislaine Maxwell, serving to soften the hard edges of her man. Sometimes she is just beautiful and voiceless arm candy, like Melania Trump, her mere presence proving the masculinity and virility of her man. Sometimes she even speaks and has a voice of her own, like Trump's former press secretary, Kellyanne Conway, and, at the time of writing, his current press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. But even then, she is just towing the line, serving as spokesperson and interpreter, with no original ideas, and certainly no critical ones, of her own. For the first half of my childhood in the Children of God cult, I watched our prophet's wife, Karen Zerbe, play this type of skinny white woman to perfection, until she ultimately stepped into greater power right after his death. The second type of skinny white woman is the secret controller. She meets the criteria for pretty sidekick, but is influencing things behind the scenes. In the book, The Cult of We see Rebecca Newman, played by Anne Hathaway in the hit miniseries We Crashed, embody this type of skinny white woman to perfection. In The Children of God, those close to the leadership saw Karen Zerbe slip into this role as our prophet got closer to death and became more dependent on substances, alcohol for him, amphetamines and barbiturates for Jim Jones a couple decades earlier, to keep him going. In the political era of the 2020s, we've seen Ron DeSantis' wife take on this role, too. In a Politico article titled The Casey DeSantis Problem, His Greatest Asset and His Greatest Liability, she's described as being seen by many as an absolute superstar of a political spouse, a not-so-secret weapon, even something like his saving grace, an antidote for her sometimes awkward husband, social in a way that he is not, charismatic in a way that he is not, generally and seemingly at ease in the spotlight in a way that he so often and so evidently is not. Interviews with people on the inside paint a picture of a first lady integral in shaping and driving the governor, seeking power through her proximity to it. But sometimes the sidekick gets ideas of her own, and sometimes the secret controller decides she wants power of her own, bringing us to the third type of skinny white woman. In The Children of God, Karen Zerbe transitioned from the prophet's loyal wife and spokesperson to become his replacement. almost as if she'd been planning it all along. On his deathbed, when his death became obvious to him, Berg advised Zerby to never tell the followers of his demise, demonstrating just how perfect she'd become at being him. Ultimately, she disregarded this advice. I know this only because my very young mother was a secretary in the room. Because she knew she could seamlessly take over his organization of complete and coercive control and lose almost none of the followers. We could argue she'd become the ultimate skinny white woman, finally gaining what they all think they are working toward, real power, just like hashtag lady bosses Elizabeth Holmes and Sheryl Sandberg, or perhaps, at the most absurd extreme, fake German heiress Anna Delvey, who created an entire fictional identity to start a business, get rich, and gain status, while swindling investors and Manhattan socialites. When this type of woman does become the boss, she steps over the line of acceptable power for a woman in our society to wield. So when they fall, these female cult leaders, toxic CEOs, and criminals, I would argue that society is much more gleeful than if she had been a man, as though she has doubly earned her punishment and shame, as much for stepping outside of the proper role for women and daring to grasp at absolute power, as for whatever crimes she committed while wielding said power. But sometimes this third type of skinny white woman forgets her place and becomes a problem for the men she supports as her one and only job. Princess Diana comes to mind, a woman who refused to toe the line of the British royal family, tone herself down, or play the role required of her. Tammy Faye Mesner, formerly Baker, ruffled the feathers of her husband, Jim Baker, and the evangelical power broker, Jerry Falwell, by using her Praise the Lord TV ministry to express compassion for gay people and those with AIDS, insisting they deserved love, not condemnation. And of course, there was the hashtag #MeToo movement, when women around the world refused to be silent about men's sexual abuses and bad behavior any longer, amplifying the call to action that Tarana Burke, an activist and founder of the original Me Too movement, had started years earlier. In my memoir, I write about the ultimate demise of my military career after my once vaunted status as golden child in my unit, when I stopped being quiet and obedient and pushed back too hard against the system. Mark Ackman, an Army major who was a captain alongside me when it all happened, said it best in a text to our Lieutenant Mafia group. What happened to Daniela is ironic, because usually when the Army realizes someone is too different for the group and drums them straight out, it's through their own fuckery. But this time, other people's fuckery brought Daniela into the spotlight, where she was still discovered to be too different to tolerate. The cult of white supremacy and patriarchy, which we've all been indoctrinated under to some extent, has taught us that it's the job of good women to be quiet, skinny, and a light shade of beige, and to not be or say anything that stands out, that draws attention to ourselves, that makes us, in any way, unique. Here, my own experience as a skinny white woman stands in interesting parallel to my experience as a U.S. Army soldier, where a common Army saying told us that all you have to do to be successful is to be in the right place at the right time in the right uniform and never volunteer for anything. More on uniforms and appearance policing in Chapter 4. The message is as familiar as it is striking. Be calm, quiet, well-behaved, ready for anything, and don't stand out. I would argue that a similar message is conveyed in most every church, school, and workplace in this country. As soon as we start deconstructing our American cult experience, we are able to see that white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism are major cultic systems that we've all been indoctrinated by. And those systems have a whole country's worth of skinny white women propping them up. By continuing to toe the line, we fail to critically question the cults and systems we are all in, and our silence is complicit in harming others. White women can no longer just be pretty, quiet sidekicks to the cult of whiteness, only using our voice when it benefits us personally. Can I speak to your manager? As someone commented on one of my TikTok videos where I actively discuss all the concepts going into this book, when a white girl is dressed like that, you know she's about to drop some truth. My violently purple bathrobe and the large beaded fluorescent pink tropical parrot earrings hanging from my ears were code that communicated, without me saying a word, I'm no longer playing their game. Let's tear this thing down. Only when we all question the sacred assumption of the cult of whiteness, that whiteness itself is sacred, will we be able to wake up from our cult.